let's talk about the gun debate in America. It's one of those topics that can feel like a raw nerve, right? It can split families, communities. It's intense. But what if we could actually understand it better? Not by picking a side, but by getting a clear map of the entire territory. That's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to use the source material to build a framework, a guide, so you can navigate this whole complex landscape with a lot more clarity. Okay, let's jump right in. So, the first and most important question we have to ask is, what is this whole thing really about? I mean, it's so easy to think it's just one simple fight. You're either for guns or you're against them. But honestly, that's like looking at a massive mountain range and only seeing two peaks. The real debate is so much bigger. It's about history, it's about how we interpret the law, it's about personal safety, the role of government. Really, it's a fight over the meaning of freedom itself. And it's happening on dozens of different fronts all at once. And this slide right here is a total eye-opener. The source material for this explainer, which is an encyclopedia on the topic, doesn't just have two chapters, for and against. No, it has 16 of these distinct categories. You've got court cases, historical events, the firearms industry, researchers, specific pieces of legislation. This isn't just a simple argument. It is an entire universe of interconnected ideas. And honestly, this complexity is exactly why finding any common ground is so incredibly difficult. Okay. So to really get a handle on the arguments you hear on the news tonight, we have to rewind. We have to go all the way back to the very beginning. And the reason this is the right place to start is because the core tensions that fuel the debate today, they were forged way back in the 1700s. Seriously. These are not new fights. They are ancient anxieties just playing out with modern technology. This timeline really sets the stage perfectly. So in 1787, before the Constitution was even fully a thing, you have the Federalist Papers revealing this deep anxiety about federal power versus state control, especially when it came to the military. That anxiety directly fuels the 1789 debate over how to word the Second Amendment. And because even that wording was seen as a little fuzzy, just a few years later in 1792, Congress felt it had to pass a law to try and spell out exactly what a militia was supposed to be. And this slide gives us such a fascinating glimpse into how the founders were thinking. They weren't just talking about some vague idea of an armed populace. Oh no. The Uniform Militia Act was incredibly specific. It literally named who was in the militia and, just as importantly, who wasn't. And it even detailed their required gear, right down to the 2 spare flints. This just goes to show they had a very particular and, for their time, very practical vision in mind. And this quote from Representative Elbridge Gerry just captures the fundamental fear that was driving one side of this argument. See, the crucial point is this. For a lot of the founders, an armed citizenry organized into these militias wasn't for hunting or even just for personal defense. It was the ultimate check against a professional, standing army that was controlled by a central government they just did not fully trust. That deep-seated tension is the seed from which everything else has grown. Now, those founding arguments and fears, they didn't just stay in the history books, right? They were written into law, which means the next logical step in our story has to be the courtroom. For over 200 years now, courts have been wrestling with how to apply those 18th century ideas to a constantly changing world. And legally, it really all boils down to this one core tension. Is the Second Amendment a collective right that protects the power of a state to form a militia, or is it an individual right that protects a single person's ability to own a gun for their own reasons, including self-defense? For decades, this was the question. This slide brings that whole legal debate to life. Just look. On the left, you've got the federal Second Amendment. It seems to tie the right to bear arms directly to the need for a well-regulated militia. But then look at the language from a state constitution like Connecticut's on the right. It's way more direct. The right is for the defense of himself and the state. The difference in emphasis there is huge, and it's where so much of the legal battle has been fought. And for a very, very long time, the Supreme Court landed squarely on the side of government authority. In this 1886 case, Presser v. Illinois, the court basically said 2 big things. First, the Second Amendment limits the federal government, not the states. And second, and this is crucial, citizens can't just decide to form their own private armies. This ruling reinforced that collective, militia-based view for decades. But, as we'll see, that interpretation would not be the final word. So, as the legal grounds started to shift in the 20th century, the fight basically exploded out of the courtrooms and right into the public square. This brings us to the modern era, where the debate is defined by these passionate, super-organized voices fighting over concrete, real-world policies. And make no mistake about it, the gun debate today is a battle of giants.
On one side, you have these powerful gun rights groups with millions of members and a ton of political influence. On the other side, you've got a really determined and growing movement of gun control advocates, often galvanized by tragedy, who are demanding change. These groups are the engines of the modern debate. And here are some of those giants. On one side, you see groups like the Brady Campaign, totally focused on changing laws, and Mayors Against Illegal Guns. On the other side, you've got the National Rifle Association, a lobbying powerhouse, and Gun Owners of America, which often takes an even more uncompromising stance. These are the organizations that frame the arguments and get voters mobilized.
So, what are these modern battlegrounds? Well, they're fighting over very specific issues where those centuries-old tensions play out. The debate over background checks at gun shows, whether manufacturers can be sued, and the deeply emotional issue of guns in schools. These are the real front lines of the gun debate today. Okay, so we've looked at the history, the law, and the modern players. Let's put all the pieces of our map together. Why does taking this kind of structured view of the debate actually matter? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, the crucial point is this. To really understand the gun debate, you have to see how its history, its laws, and its modern players are all connected. The arguments about militias from 1789 directly inform the Supreme Court cases of the 1880s, which in turn set the stage for the advocacy battles being fought today over something like trigger locks. You see? It's all one continuous story. So what's this number? 338. That is the total number of separate, individual entries in the encyclopedia that this explainer is based on. 338 different court cases, pieces of legislation, individuals, concepts, the whole shebang. So the next time you hear someone say this is a simple issue, well, you'll know they're definitely not telling the whole story.
Which leaves us with a final question for you. Now that you have this map, this framework of the history, the law, and the players, how are you going to navigate the conversation? When you see the next headline about guns, will you be able to spot the historical echo? Will you better understand the legal tension that's humming just beneath the surface? The choice of how you use that map? Well, that's yours.